I never thought my dream of becoming a farmer would turn into a nightmare. 6 months ago, I purchased a beautiful 5-acre property on the outskirts of Maplewood Valley. The land had been in agricultural use since the 1950s, and when the elderly couple who owned it decided to retire, they chose me, Adrian Thompson, to continue their legacy. The previous owners, the Hendersons, had tears in their eyes when they handed me the keys. "Take care of this land, Adrian," Mr. Henderson said, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "It's got good soil, good memories, and a whole lot of love poured into it." I promised them I would honor their decades of hard work by transforming the property into a sustainable organic farm. Those first few months were pure bliss. I woke up every morning at 4:30 a.m., just as the first hints of dawn painted the sky in gentle purples and pinks. My small farmhouse might have been modest, but it was mine. The satisfaction of watching my first crops push through the soil was worth every callus on my hands and every dollar of my life savings I'd invested. Everything changed when the luxury housing development next door finally finished construction. Ridgewood Estates, they called it. Houses starting at $1.2 million, with perfectly manicured lawns and identical beige paint jobs. I didn't mind the development. Live and let live was my motto. Besides, several local restaurants had already signed contracts to buy my organic produce, and some of the new residents even stopped by to purchase fresh vegetables. Then Diana Blackwood moved in. I'll never forget the day she first appeared at my property line. She wore designer workout clothes and enough jewelry to open a small boutique. Her perfectly highlighted hair was pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to stretch her face into a permanent look of disapproval. "Mr. Thompson," she called out as I was harvesting tomatoes, "we need to discuss your situation." I wiped my hands on my work pants and walked over. "Good morning. Would you like to try some fresh tomatoes?" "They're down." "I'm Diana Blackwood, the new president of the Ridgewood Estates Homeowners Association," she interrupted, her voice as warm as a January frost. "I'm here to inform you that your property is in violation of several HOA regulations." I blinked in confusion. "Ma'am, I'm not part of your HOA. This property has been a working farm for over 70 years. Her artificial smile tightened. "That was before Ridgewood Estates existed. Your farm is decreasing our property values." The smell of fertilizer, the sight of agricultural equipment, the constant presence of delivery trucks, it's simply unacceptable. "With all due respect, Mrs. Blackwood, your HOA has no jurisdiction over my property. I'm operating a legal business, properly zoned for agriculture." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. "We'll see about that. Did you know your irrigation system is violating city water usage ordinances? And those greenhouse structures weren't approved by our architectural committee." "Again, I'm not part of your HOA," I explained, trying to maintain my patience. "My water usage is permitted through the Department of Agriculture, and my structures are all properly permitted." Diana's eyes narrowed. "Listen carefully, Mr. Thompson. I've spent the last 20 years turning struggling neighborhoods into prestigious communities. I will not allow your little hobby farm to destroy the property values in Ridgewood Estates. You have two choices. Either convert this eyesore into something more appropriate for our community or face the consequences." "Mrs. Blackwood," I said firmly, "this isn't a hobby farm. This is my livelihood, and I have contracts with local businesses that depend on my produce. I'm not going anywhere." She tucked her phone into her designer workout jacket. "We'll see about that. I should warn you, I've never lost a battle with someone who threatened the sanctity of my communities. Never." As she turned and walked away, her designer sneakers somehow avoiding every speck of dirt, I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd heard stories about aggressive HOAs, but this felt different. The look in Diana's eyes wasn't just determination, it was outright malice. That evening, as I was closing up the greenhouse, I noticed a black luxury SUV driving slowly past my property. Even through the tinted windows, I could make out Diana's silhouette, her phone held up as she continued taking pictures. I tried to shake off my unease as I headed inside. The farm was legal, my permits were in order, and I had every right to be there. But as I watched Diana's SUV make another pass, I couldn't help but remember her words, "I've never lost a battle." Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a war I never asked for, a war over my right to farm the land I legally owned. Diana Blackwood had just declared war on my little piece of paradise, and she was about to unleash every weapon in her considerable arsenal to shut me down. That night, I called the Hendersons to tell them about my encounter with Diana. Mrs. Henderson's voice trembled as she spoke. "Oh, Adrian, be careful. We've heard stories about that woman from our friends in other communities. She doesn't just fight to win, she fights to destroy." As I hung up the phone and looked out at my darkened fields, I couldn't help but wonder, what had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how far would Diana Blackwood go to achieve her goals? I had no way of knowing then that this was just the first skirmish in a battle that would change not just my life, but the entire community of Maplewood Valley forever. The following weeks turned my peaceful farming life into a bureaucratic nightmare. Diana Blackwood wasn't kidding about her intentions to destroy my farm, and she proved to be remarkably creative in her methods of harassment. It started with daily anonymous complaints to the city. Monday, noise violations from my tractor. Tuesday, accusations of improper waste disposal. Wednesday, claims that my irrigation system was flooding neighboring properties. Thursday, reports of unauthorized commercial activity. Friday, allegations that I was running an illegal farmer's market. The city inspectors became such regular visitors that one of them, Rick, 32, started bringing his own coffee mug. "Look, Adrian," Rick said one morning, exhaling heavily as he filled out yet another inspection report. "We both know these complaints are bogus, but I have to investigate every single one. Someone's really got it out for you." I knew exactly who that someone was. Diana had graduated from taking pictures to filming my every move. She'd even set up lawn chairs along the property line where she and her loyal followers would sit and document my violations while sipping expensive wine and wearing sun hats that probably cost more than my monthly seed budget. But the real trouble began when local restaurants started calling to cancel their contracts. Liam Winters, 45, owner of the Harvest Table, my biggest client, came to the farm personally to break the news. "Adrian, someone from the HOA contacted our insurance company," he explained, looking genuinely distressed. "They're claiming your produce isn't properly certified and threatened to report us to the health department." "I can't risk my restaurant, man. I'm sorry." One by one, my clients dropped away. Diana had somehow discovered their identities and systematically targeted each one. But she didn't stop there. Strange things started happening around the farm. First, sections of my irrigation system mysteriously failed. I'd find cuts in the lines that couldn't have happened accidentally. Then my soil started showing signs of contamination in specific patches, perfectly circular patches that suggested deliberate sabotage. Security cameras I installed captured shadowy figures at night, but never clear enough footage for proof. The final straw came when I discovered my greenhouse had been vandalized. Every single seedling was destroyed, representing thousands of dollars in lost inventory and months of work. As I stood among the devastation, my hands shaking with anger, Diana appeared at the greenhouse door. "My goodness," she said, fake concern dripping from her voice. "What a terrible accident. You know, Adrian, running a farm is such risky business. Wouldn't it be easier to just sell? I happen to know several developers who would offer you a very fair price." I turned to face her. Dirt streaked across my face, mixing with angry tears. "This was no accident, Diana. We both know what you're doing." She smiled, a cold, calculating expression that never reached her eyes. "Prove it." "Oh, and by the way, I thought you should know, I've called an emergency meeting of the city council. We're proposing to rezone this entire area as residential only. No more agricultural use permitted." My heart sank. "You can't do that. This land has been a farm for generations." "Watch me," she replied, examining her manicured nails. "Times change, Adrian. Progress is inevitable. The vote is next week. I suggest you start packing." What Diana didn't know was that her campaign of destruction had caught the attention of more than just me. Local farmers' rights activists had been documenting everything. Environmental groups were investigating the soil contamination. And most importantly, several of her own HOA members were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with her methods. Eleanor Rodriguez, 67, who lived directly next to Diana and Ridgewood Estates, started secretly passing me information. "She's obsessed with destroying you," Eleanor whispered one day over my fence. "She's called 3 different HOA meetings just to discuss your farm. But something's not right with the HOA finances. Every time someone asks about the legal fees she's spending, she changes the subject." I also found an unlikely ally in Benjamin Foster, 39, a forensic accountant who had recently moved into Ridgewood Estates. He started attending HOA meetings and asking pointed questions about the association's spending. The numbers don't add up, he told me one morning while buying vegetables from my roadside stand, one of my last remaining sources of income. She's spending way more on this vendetta against you than our HOA could possibly afford. Something bigger is going on here. The situation reached a boiling point when Diana organized a protest in front of my farm. 20 of her closest followers stood along the road with signs reading, "No farms in our neighborhood and protect our property values." Local news crews showed up to cover the story, but it backfired spectacularly when reporters interviewed other neighbors who supported the farm. "That farm was here long before Ridgewood Estates," said Thomas Wright, 72, a retired judge who lived in the area. "If these people didn't want to live near agriculture, they shouldn't have bought houses next to a working farm." It's that simple. The media attention brought scrutiny Diana hadn't counted on. People started asking questions about why an HOA president was spending so much time and resources targeting a property that wasn't even part of her association. Letters to the editor appeared in local papers defending the importance of preserving agricultural land. But Diana was undeterred. If anything, the resistance made her more determined. The night before the city council rezoning vote, I caught her on my security cameras, prowling around my property with what looked like a container of chemicals. When I confronted her, she quickly retreated to her SUV. "You're trespassing," I called after her. "This has to stop. Tomorrow's vote will stop it permanently," she shot back. "Enjoy your last night as a farmer, Adrian. Your little organic paradise is about to become history." What Diana didn't realize was that her obsession with destroying my farm had made her sloppy. She'd left a trail of evidence that was about to catch up with her. Benjamin Foster had been quietly building a case, and Eleanor Rodriguez had been keeping detailed records of every HOA meeting and suspicious expenditure. As I went to bed that night, my future uncertain, I had no idea that Diana's carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. The next day's city council meeting would bring revelations that would shock everyone, especially Diana Blackwood herself. The karma she had coming would be sweeter than any crop I'd ever harvested. The city council meeting started exactly as Diana had planned, but it certainly wouldn't end that way. The chamber was packed with people from both sides, her HOA supporters in their coordinated business attire on one side, and my fellow farmers, regular customers, and environmental activists on the other. Diana strutted to the podium like she was walking a runway, armed with a PowerPoint presentation about property values and neighborhood character. Her perfectly rehearsed speech painted a picture of my farm as an environmental hazard and economic drain on the community. I sat there, my work-worn hands clenched in my lap, as she systematically tried to destroy everything I'd built. Then Benjamin Foster raised his hand. "Before we proceed with this rezoning vote," he said, standing up with a thick folder in his hands, "I'd like to present some relevant financial information about Ridgewood Estates HOA and Mrs. Blackwood's activities." Diana's face flickered with something I'd never seen before: fear. "This is irrelevant to the zoning issue," she interrupted, but Council Chairman Robert Thompson, no relation to me, allowed Benjamin to continue. What happened next was like watching a perfectly orchestrated demolition. Benjamin, in his quiet, methodical way, laid out a devastating case. Using HOA financial records provided by Eleanor Rodriguez, he demonstrated how Diana had embezzled over $850,000 from the HOA over the past 3 years. The money she'd been using to wage her legal war against my farm, all stolen from her neighbors' HOA fees. "Mrs. Blackwood has been using the HOA as her personal piggy bank," Benjamin explained, projecting spreadsheets onto the screen Diana had intended for her anti-farm presentation. "She's been funneling money through fake landscaping companies, inflated legal fees, and non-existent maintenance projects." The chamber erupted in chaos. HOA members who'd blindly supported Diana were now shouting questions about their missing money. But the revelations weren't over. Eleanor Rodriguez stood up next, clutching a USB drive. "I have security footage," she announced, her voice shaking but determined. "Mrs. Blackwood sabotaging Mr. Thompson's farm." The footage played on the big screen, crystal clear shots from my security cameras, showing Diana cutting irrigation lines, spreading chemicals on my crops, and destroying my greenhouse, all time-stamped and unmistakable. The gasps from the audience were audible. Diana tried to flee the chamber, but 2 police officers were already waiting at the doors. Detective Lisa Reeves, 41, who had been quietly investigating the financial fraud claims, stepped forward. "Diana Blackwood," she announced, "you're under arrest for grand theft, vandalism, criminal trespassing, and environmental contamination. As they led Diana away in handcuffs, she was still trying to maintain control. This is ridiculous. I was protecting our community. Adrian Thompson is the real criminal here. But nobody was listening anymore. The city council unanimously voted to deny the rezoning request. Furthermore, they passed an emergency measure to designate my property as protected agricultural land under the state's Heritage Farm program. The aftermath was spectacular. Diana's case made national news, not just because of the amount of money she'd stolen, but because of the lengths she'd gone to in her vendetta against my farm. The environmental crimes alone carried serious penalties. Those mysterious chemicals she'd spread on my fields turned out to be banned pesticides that could have poisoned the groundwater. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to both the HOA and my farm. Her luxury house in Ridgewood Estates was seized as part of the settlement. In a twist that could only be described as poetic justice, the new HOA board, led by Eleanor Rodriguez, voted to turn Diana's former property into a community garden and educational center. The best part? Local restaurants started calling again. Not only did my old clients return, but new ones reached out, drawn by the publicity of the case. The Harvest Table's owner, Liam, came back with a 5-year contract and an apology. "You stood your ground," he said, surveying my recovering fields. "That means something in this community." 1 year later, my farm is thriving. The community garden in Diana's old house has become a gathering place where residents grow their own vegetables and learn about sustainable farming. Every Saturday, I teach gardening classes there, showing a new generation the importance of local agriculture. Eleanor tells me that Diana still writes angry letters from prison, demanding updates about her former house. Nobody responds to them. They're too busy tending their tomatoes and sharing gardening tips. Last week, the Hendersons visited the farm. Mrs. Henderson hugged me with tears in her eyes as she looked over the flourishing fields. "You didn't just take care of the land," she said. "You protected it. You fought for it." I stood there with them, watching the sunset over my crops, thinking about how Diana's attempt to destroy my farm had actually made it stronger. The community that rallied around me during the fight has become an integral part of the farm's success. Even some former HOA members who once protested against me now volunteer at our weekend farmers markets. Sometimes karma works in mysterious ways. Diana Blackwood set out to shut down my farm, but instead, she united community, protected agricultural land for future generations, and created something beautiful, even if that wasn't exactly what she had in mind. As for me, I'm just grateful to be living my dream, growing food for my community, and proving that sometimes the good guys really do win. Oh, and those security cameras that caught Diana in the act. I kept them up. You never know when another HOA president might move in next door.